All right. Thanks, guys. I will talk to you soon.
Happy car adventures.
All right. Thank you.
Here's the. Okay, well, Steve, why don't you take it away since you're the guy with the issue?
Yeah, I guess I have to only open a topic if anybody else has anything. Um, so I was working through the spec PR, and there was a lot of great feedback, so that was really helpful. I addressed everything with the exception of the media types, which seems to be the biggest open question. And honestly, I don't have enough knowledge to have enough next round of opinion. So before we go to the media types, which I know I see Derek and John, I'm sure others might be interested as well, but there's a really good discussion I want to have there. Was there anything else that anybody wanted to discuss generally around the spec so far?
No, I mean I looked over, where it's headed, and it looks like it's definitely heading in the right direction.
Okay. I'm just looking for chat or whatever else, if anybody else. Okay. So I'm guessing the media types is the big conversation. So I haven't had a chance to read the RFC yet. So I started reading it. It's really big. I figured being sleepy on a plane, I was not going to digest enough, and I haven't had focus since then. It does look promising. The other thing, the Perl PURL thing, the package manager folks recommended doesn't really apply to this. So Vincent even mentioned don't bother with that. So certainly the RFC, I did read enough that there's a place to register media types or MIME types, which looks perfect. So we'll assume that's the right thing. I think the place, well, it's probably a general discussion if others have more knowledge about it. I haven't gotten to it yet. But the other was, I really wanted to focus on, if we could, was the root of the conversation seems to be if it's just a tar and not a special diff tar like we do with OCI layers, but a tar for just a standard tar archive, do we need to have a artifact specific layer type? So it doesn't need to be helm dot tar, obviously the whole thing is longer, or can it just be application slash tar? So that's the place that I wanted to have get some input from others on what they thought. And the only thought that I had, and it was literally like 5 minutes before this meeting, was do we need to version the layers, or does the layers just get versioned with the manifest for that artifact? Thoughts, conversations?
I have
mean,
thoughts.
There's also nothing precluding you having that version data in some standard place inside of the tarball, right?
Oh, you mean just as in the content of the tar?
Yep.
True. The thought was because everything else is versioned on the reference to it, I figured we should be consistent there.
Yeah, the downside is then you actually have to pull the content down before you know if you can actually use it or not.
Yeah. So I think John or somebody's got a phone number there. The one that was going to jump in maybe.
So I don't know that it makes sense to version the layer independently of the rest of the artifact, because if you're changing some aspect of that image, if you're versioning the layer, I'm going to have to reinterpret how it works, and so you might as well version the whole artifact, and then whatever the media type of the new layer happens to be, then that's what it is. So I suspect whenever you are changing how a layer works, what you're actually doing is changing how I should interpret the contents of that thing, and
Right.
that's orthogonal to the media type of those contents. So it may still be a tarball, but perhaps there's a different set of files. But if you also were to change from a tarball to, say, like a file system diff, then you would also need to bump the image media type as well, because no client will understand the difference between a tarball and a file system diff unless they understand the difference between V1 and V2. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. So basically what we're saying is it's not so much the versioning of the content of the file, because that would really be tied to the artifact itself version. But if the tar format, for instance, change, or let's use CIF as a better example. if the Singularity folks change the content of the CIF format to be a v2 of some sort, there it would be CIF v2, but or would it? Like, I guess actually, when I think about it, do content types, I'm kind of going a bit of a tangent here. So let me go back to closing out what you said before I get into there. If it's just tar and they change, let's say Helm decides to pull out the config object, as was a discussion in that mail thread, then the Helm clients that read the artifact would need to know that. So there's no reason you would bump the artifact version, not the layer version.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, the thing that I'm trying to get at with this, for my own selfish reasons, is that if I'm writing a client, which I have several, and I want to interpret an artifact in a generic way, like perhaps I don't care that it is a Helm thing or a Docker thing or whatever. I just want to, say, copy it from one registry to another, or like look at the files in it. If I see application/tar, I know what that is. If I see the OCI file system diff, I know how to handle that. If I see like CIF whatever, I have no idea what that is. But
you can choose to know what that is, to your point.
Right. So like I'd like to keep things that are actually generic, and only specialize the things that need to be specialized, so that we can have compatibility between artifacts where it's possible. Otherwise, I just will end up hard coding strings all over the place, or having to import some external dependency to map. I don't know. It gets complicated.
So give me an example, because there's two different types of tools, right? There's tools that are specific to an artifact, and then there's generic tooling and that would opt into specific types. Like, for instance, to your point, like we call it importing images. Like we have an AZACR import that we can move a manifest or even an index, a collection of manifests between two registries. And today we don't support other artifact types. We will. But the idea is I don't really need to know what the type is. I just need to know I need to move these blobs, and I would look at the manifest or the index eventually. I would look at the manifest, say, hey, here's the URLs. I need to move them from point registry A to registry B, or repo A to repo B. I've started to see some other tools. I just drew a blank on what it is. There's some other containers image. Containers image tooling. Can you help me a little bit with what kind of other scenarios that you would look at the layers separately from the artifact in a generic way?
So something I've done a lot is for a container image, I want to know the content of a file that's in that image. And I don't really want to Docker pull the entire thing, Docker save it, and then untar it, and then ungzip each individual layer, and then look at all of them. There's a Docker export that does what I want. But basically, sometimes I just want to export an individual file. And for a container image, you have to understand how the file system diff stuff works in the overlay file system. That's fine. You can write a tool that exports the whole file system as a tar, and then use the normal tar tool to extract a file from that. What I'd like is if a container or an artifact it's just pointing to a tarball, then I can have my tool understand oh, this layer is just a regular tarball. I can just append that to the stream or something like that. And then that same exporting a file from an artifact will work across multiple different artifacts.
So in the OCI image space, it could be a whited out file, so you don't really know unless you look at the whole graph.
Right. You have to flatten an OCI image, but for any other artifact, perhaps I just look. If it's a tarball, okay, I know how to handle that. If it's a CIF, I have no idea, right? So I'd skip over that. My worry is that if we have these unique media types for every single thing, even though they're identical, I can no longer use one tool to handle these things unless I just guess, probably this is a tar stream.
Well, in theory, and I'm just going to use this as a comparative. I'm not saying we should do this, but if you use what I was currently putting in there, you could look at the extension, because the last dot extension says .tar, and I've cleaned up a couple of places where I had dots and pluses confused. So in theory, your tooling would still work, because if it's a tarball, it should say .tar. If it's a compressed tarball, it should be .tar plus gzip or whatever compression it is. So having the preface on it that says it's a Helm tar doesn't hurt you. It just means you're parsing the extension.
Well, that's not always true though. Like with the diffs, we do the processing during the tar extraction. So we actually use a media type to determine, like the client uses that to determine how it's actually going to process the stream of data. Like we don't do like multiple passes over the stream of data. We look at the media type and then pass that on to some tooling which understands it.
Oh, because what we're saying is a Helm tar really is just a plain old tar versus an OCI tar is a diff. So we're basically just overcomplicating it. And I'm honestly, I'm not finding a good justification to make it a Helm tar versus a plain tar. I'm just exploring the conversation.
I mean, from a tooling perspective, it just like increases this matrix of media types that you're looking for and how to process them. Like it's easy to understand. Like if it's just a normal tar, then yeah, you can use any tar application to untar it. And so if you see application tar, it's pretty simple what to do. But when it's a diff, there's actually like, you don't just do an untar, there's actual like file system operations that you may do while you're processing it. So it is different. And when you, in this case where you're adding like a new media type that does the same thing, it just causes the clients to have to look for another media type to do
or it has the
the exact
concept.
same thing.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, if I pass a foo.tar to tar, it still knows it's a tar. So I'm trying to make a mental comparison that the beginning of the media type shouldn't really matter. But I think your point is that there really is a difference between an OCI tar, which is one tar of many, that's a diff gram, where here there literally are just single tars, and we should just keep them as simple as they are.
Yeah, I think that the best way to probably describe this is, because you could rat hole infinitely on this by like, what is the definition of a regular tar versus when you like tooling needs to know something more about tar. Because for example, maybe I could just untar a layer diff and say, actually looking at whited out versus non-whited out may be useful for something else that just knows nothing about whiting out at all. I don't know. Like you can basically make arguments that, well, as long as you can still untar it, like still a tarball. So like I can see rabbit holing basically forever infinitely. But I think a great way to define where to draw the line for this would be, can you reach for a pre-existing other tool to interpret this file? So in the case of Helm, I could basically download that artifact and actually run the tar command on it to get a useful output that something else could then look at and interpret, right? Versus in the OCI diffing one, I can download a layer diff, but because there are certain file names named certain ways, and there isn't even like a whole necessarily like file system there that you would expect maybe, it's not like I can just like, I could tar extract it, but like the semantic value from what I just extracted is nebulous, right? Versus if I just tar extracted a Helm chart, I can actually just like see a real file system there, right?
Do you know this? Like, is the other piece of data missing that the OCI layer is part of an OCI manifest? So if by looking at the manifest, like I'm almost making an argument, I'm not suggesting we change this. I'm almost making an argument that OCI layers could be just application tars also, because it's not, the file itself is still tarred, if I understand it right, but the fact that it is an OCI collection, an OCI image collection, that is the extra piece of inference that says, oh, these are a collection of tars that I do something special with to overlay them. But do we need that complexity for all our types?
To be honest, I think it would have been better if we just used application tar, at least for the base layers for images. As I said, for the diffs, it's a little complicated. Yeah, as Jimmy said, you can just untar it and it will untar, but it might produce the wrong result. And that's where it's a tooling thing. If you just use like normal tar tooling, you can't expect the same result because of just things, the way it has like inheritance and the way whiteouts are handled.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's where we should draw the line. If you can pick up another tool off the shelf and actually delivers like the semantic intended value at using the end of that thing, right, then you should use that media type. But because the OCI ones, it actually doesn't make sense if you just tar them. You actually need to like overlay them and look at like what's whited out versus what's like actually present in the file system. Like that's extra tooling on top. So just using tar does not cut it for that. You need a specialized tool. But in the case for Helm, like it'd be cool if, I don't know, you built some other crazy tooling and it was able to just look at that media type kind of like your browser looks at the accepts headers and goes, oh, this is a tarball. I know how to handle this. And it just works. Right.
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. So what I'm hearing, and I'm agreeing, because I was trying to explore a little bit to see if there's something else I was missing, but it sounds like it makes sense. If it is just that extensions type, we should just keep it as that. So if it is just a tarball, then it's just a tar. And if it's a YAML, it's a JSON, whatever, they would just be that extension. And then if it's something additionally added to it, such as compression, or I saw some conversations for encryption as well, those would be root format plus additional enhancement plus additional enhancement. Is that the pattern we're suggesting?
That's how I interpret that RFC. I think if a layer is actually just an individual file, you would do like application/JSON, perhaps. I don't know. I haven't thought this through really, but it as much as possible, I think we should use prior art and not invent new things.
And now that I understand that the RFC allows for registration of these media types, the artifact authors will have to register, or whatever. They would register their manifest media type, but we don't need to put additional tags to register layer. I don't know whether to call them layers or blobs, so we'll defer that conversation for a minute. Let's just assume those are interchangeable for now. They shouldn't have to go some additional tags to register layer types that really are already semantically in this listed.
Yeah, what is Zif doing? Is it just a tarball, or what is it?
I don't know, actually. I assume it's some proprietary format of theirs.
Okay. Yeah, maybe they should have to register that. But I mean, none of this, there's no requirement, right? But it would be nice. And it also guarantees some uniqueness.
Yeah, so that's, all right, so I'll come back to that one because that is important about the uniqueness part. So I still have to read the RFC, but it sounds like folks that are familiar with it, the whole application/VND ... thing for unique, there is an application/JSON and application/tar that, and I will read it before updating the spec, but that's what it seems like you guys are saying.
Yeah, something already exists, use that. If it doesn't map to what you're doing, you need a new thing.
So for Josh, who's trying to get the Helm 3 checked in this week, is it, I'm not going to chance to read the full RFC and digest it before I think he needed a deadline. Is it literally application/tar? If I just told him to go off and do that, would that be accurate?
I would like that.
Okay.
If that satisfies the rest of the requirements, like you're able to actually understand what that significance of that blob is for the tooling, then absolutely. Like if that works for you guys, then you should definitely, it's keep it simple, stupid, right? Like Occam's razor. Like use the simplest thing, please, for the love of God, for all of us.
And does anybody have an opinion? I saw some conversations, and I think it was John, on the over the wire versus compressed on persisted. Like Helm charts are really small in comparison to container images. Does anybody have an opinion on whether they should do obviously it's their choice at the end of the day, but do we want to start telling people to don't bother compressing small files by default?
About compressing the JSON files?
Sorry, Derek, what was that?
Like the JSON files?
Yeah, obviously some JSON gets huge, but if they're, but yes, sorry, you were asking Helm JSON. Yes, I thought Helm had YAML. But in the Helm, let's just use the Helm scenario. They're generally speaking pretty small. I mean, if they hit a K for an entire Helm chart, am I just not thinking about typical Helm charts? But my thought is just make them tar and don't compress them.
Yeah, it's just a file system tar and YAML, a couple of YAML manifests that are pretty small.
I think the reason I'm trying to be so pedantic about this is because the answer to that is it doesn't matter. As if they follow all of these specifications, then the client should be able to interpret it correctly. So if they want to gzip it, they would do application/tar plus gzip, and me as an author of a client, I should be able to interpret that correctly, and I don't care if it's compressed or not.
Correct. Sorry, I went on to a best practices conversation.
Oh, yeah, I don't.
I should have delineated that a little better. And I'm asking this more experienced, educated, scarred set of folks what you guys think. I know we've all been having varied conversations around performance of containers and doing varied bits of work.
They should do it makes sense. I mean, whatever's producing this artifact could be clever and say, oh, this is a 40 megabyte YAML file. I'll probably compress that. And then as a client, I'll understand that it's compressed because of the media type, and everything just works and nobody cares.
Oh, that's interesting. What you're kind of suggesting is if there's some threshold that they arbitrarily decide that they're not going to compress it, then the layer would just be /tar, application/tar to be complete. And if they decide in their client that, hey, if the thing is a bit bigger than 40 megabyte, because you just said that, then I should always compress it. And that's just logic for them. And then external tooling would understand how to deal with those as well.
Yep, that's what we get out of caring about this media type thing. That's the power.
Yeah.
If you just want opinions, I would say never compress JSON. It shouldn't be that big in the first place. And I mean, you can compress stuff over the wire,
Right.
but it's easier from a debuggability perspective if you can just see the JSON. And I don't think it's worth it. It's just doing extra processing.
Yep. That's what I'm trying to do, is minimize we get the things to the machines, and then all of a sudden we're spending compute, disk, and memory to decompress something. All right, cool.
Well, I mean, you can do that in the wire anyways, but you can let the transport decide that part. I mean,
like practically
JSON's really shouldn't be that
speaking,
big.
I just don't think this is a problem for Helm. I think you could literally do whatever. You could do it or not. It's not really going to make too much of a difference. Maybe we'll see if people like CNAB is a place where I would actually see this becoming more of a discussion where, yeah, I think you'd follow John's advice of doing like variable sized compression, like using some heuristic to decide it. But that's just because CNAB is like a whole collection of artifacts together that are containers potentially. So, but yeah, in Helm chart use case, it's like maybe you're pulling down a couple megabytes, maybe.
I feel like if your JSON's getting so big that you're thinking about compression, that you're already going to have
This
performance
isn't
issues.
JSON. This is just tarballs, right?
You're basically, a little self-reflection should be taken.
Yeah, if you have like a 10 megabyte JSON, like actually parsing that can be slow, and it can expand your memory already.
Okay. All right. So for those that have been kind of looking at the layout, what I'm trying to do is the spec will be kind of what you'd expect from a spec. It'll be more the facts, and the opinions will be in the artifact authors and the registry operators docs. So I have factored out the spec, and I did see some feedback. It should move into one of the the authors or the registry operator spec. So I did move that out. I didn't close those other PRs yet because I haven't moved the content over. But it seems everybody's kind of seeing the spec is the one to focus on the feedback for now. I'm hoping by next week I'll get a chance to work on it more. The next area I'm going to focus on is really understanding the RFC. But the action item I'll do for here is I'll let Josh know to just use application/tar. And if he wants to zip it, he'll just do a plus gzip, assuming it's gzip he's using. That'll unblock him for the Helm 3 release that they're doing. And I will finish reading the RFC, figure out what else needs to be done, because we do need to figure out something around the media types. Oh, the uniqueness. That was where I was going with this. Okay, so for the uniqueness, I think the RFC thing, specific RFC, I can't remember the number, 9383 maybe, makes a lot of sense because it talks about registering those. And the reason, if I'm just doing it in my own company, if I've got, Contoso foo things that I'm creating, then I don't need to register it because I'm just using it myself. I'm not asking any other registry. In fact, let's just for a second assume I'm just using the reference implementation of Docker distribution. I don't need to tell anybody, just do it myself. if they want to be well-known types, which I've tried to put into the definitions that I think already got into the repo, then the assumption is that I would push this definition into the artifacts repo. There's a section for well-known types, or there's a pending section for well-known types. And then the varied registries can pull it, and we know about it. So if I come up to them and want to do a Helm push, we already support it because they're all well-known types already. For people to get them to be unique, we've been trying to figure out what is the clearinghouse. Instead of us being the sole clearinghouse and just having a varied opinion of who does it on the day, it sounds like the RFC infrastructure for that media type RFC has something. So I'm hoping to piggyback on that. And then when the PR comes to us to submit a well-known type, one of the checksums, which the checksum sounds too technical, one of the checks we would do is, hey, did you actually register this? Oh, yes, you did. Great, you're fine, you're unique. No, you didn't. Oh, please do this first, come back to us. And then we would be able to know uniqueness. Thoughts? So thumbs up sounds good.
I mean, I talk about like uniqueness on the configs here mostly.
Yeah, for the manifest. Sorry, I jumped out of the manifest uniqueness. Sorry, I jumped out of the layer uniqueness and I was back to the manifest. So for the Helm chart to be a unique artifact, we need a unique name for the Helm charts in the manifest config.media type. So, but the problem we've been having is like, I would make some samples that were Steve Lasker. Well, there's more than one Steve Lasker. How do I make that unique? If I go to the registration for MIME types and I grab it first, then I get it. It's kind of like an email address, if you will. So then I could come to the OCI artifact spec and say, hey, I'm going to submit my well-known type. And we either go, what the hell is this Steve Lasker thing? We don't need that type. That's like the Marky Mark thing. Or it's like, no, there's something, my name isn't the best example, but say some company name that, how do we know that they are the globally unique one worldwide that we want to store as that name? If they grab a media type that's unique, then we would, a MIME type that's unique, we would accept that as part of the PR of well-known type.
Well, I think like from an OCI perspective, like OCI is not really like a place where you go to register anything. Like if something gets to the OCI level or comes to OCI, it should be something that's already used. So at that point, it's kind of a place that there's already some level of use and agreement on it, and we're just adding it in a place where you can add discoverability and some level of making it official. But in terms of like making decisions about what these should be, I don't think that should be up to OCI. I mean, we can have a suggested standard for creating new ones, but I don't think it's really like a decision for OCI to make whether or not, who owns that namespace. I mean, if people are using it, then, that's what it is.
So I think that is what I'm trying to articulate is without knowing about this registration of MIME types, I was assuming people would do PRs to the artifacts well-known types subfolder, and we would have to decide on uniqueness. What reading this MIME type RFC is, there seems to already be a place to register the media types, the MIME types. But just registering the MIME type isn't enough information, right? There's that whole artifact type.json file that explains what exactly it is. So there'll be obviously one for OCI image. There would be one presumed for a Helm chart. There would be one for Singularity, OPA, eventually CNAV. And what I think I'm trying to say, confirming what you're saying, is we wouldn't own the uniqueness. I would defer that to the MIME registration. And as long as their media type that they put in the config, the manifest.config.media type is already registered, then they get it. The only thing we're doing at that time in approving the PR is, I remember exactly how I worded it in the spec, is saying, yes, this follows good practices. You don't have some vulgar logo or vulgar names in the thing, and it is relevant. It's not like I'll pick on John. It's not John's cat collection type. It is something of more universal standard that we would accept, because the assumption is if you're putting it in as a well-known type, that more than likely the assumption is most if not all registry operators will just import that and support it. Of course, there's no requirement for them to do that. That would be a choice. But they could easily import it, and then they would get the right logo, they'd get the right short description, and all of that robustness around it.
Yeah, I think from the maintainer's perspective for OCI, as you said, well known, we're just making sure that it is well known and that the information is accurate. Not like a qualitative filter of whether or not it's good, or like judging like how the stuff is registered. I mean, yeah, that there's different ways to do that. When we haven't always done that the best way in the past in terms of deciding how these names are created. But I think at least from this, or from the artifacts perspective, like the maintainers are just making sure it's well known. If something seems fishy, like somebody pushed through something that using some sort of weird naming convention, then we can have that back and forth. But at that point, like it's hard to make that change. So it's better to try to steer things at the beginning, as you were saying, like have suggestions for how to do it properly.
Yeah.
But I think once you're opening a PR to say, hey, I want to add this, we're just making sure that, hey, this is well known. This isn't just one person coming in with some idea. This is something that, there's consensus, there's multiple parties using it. It's not just a single person or a single company trying to publicize something that they just created and no one's using.
Right. It's not a marketplace to advertise and try to get you. The assumption is you already have a usage base, and we're just making, like, the assumption, like if somebody's experimenting with something new, so John wants to make his cat collection, a universal thing, he'd advertise that artifact, what did I call it? Artifact type JSON, I think. He would have that schema on his site, wherever that is. He'd promote it. It would start to get popular. There'd be some pressure that says, hey, I can't push this to ACR, ECR, GCR, Quay. I would like to. Well, the process for doing that, and letting us all know about it, is you can submit it to OCI artifacts, and then it becomes a well-known type. And we look at it and go like, this is a goofy cat collection thing, but it turns out everybody's using it, so sure, we'll approve it. That's the concept. Now, the details of what needs to be in it and all of those, and the process to go register the MIME type will be in the artifact authors part of the spec. In fact, most of that is there. Obviously, I don't have the registering of the media type, the MIME type yet, because I didn't know about it, but that'll be in that section. So when they do submit the PR, we're not first giving them information. We're validating they followed the guidance at that point, and best practices and all that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Sweet. Okay. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we've been discussing. Let me take a quick look at the PR. Looks like the only things still open are the things related to the media type. Even the last one by Lum JJB. Oh, that's the stuff. Yeah, that's still the same area. So that'll all get cleaned up. Great. I'm just scrolling through this here. Okie dokie. Anything else? Anybody have another agenda item or anything else we wanted to talk about artifacts at this point?
It might be fun for somebody to try to run the Z standard suffix through the IANA process to see how, like, is that actually difficult? Like, how hard is this?
Right.
Because if we propose this as a thing you have to do for the artifacts project, and it turns out to take like a multi-million-dollar company several years to push something through, then maybe that's a terrible idea.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe I'll ask, and Jimmy, I think you're on Helm, right? So maybe we can ask Josh and the Helm group to try to go through that process and see if that's viable.
Yeah, realistically, I feel like there's a specific multi-million-dollar company I could think of that would be best positioned, maybe like the one that made Z standard, right? So
Is that Facebook?
yeah, it's Facebook. I'm kind of surprised they haven't kind of pushed for that in general prior to now. I suspect that our tiny group of people wouldn't necessarily have political clout, but if somebody on that team was involved, or like we should be able to. There's somebody in some other community that we should be talking to. It shouldn't just be us walking out to the door being like, "Hey, we care about Z standard now," and for some reason, no one else has, right?
So has it not been used? Is that what you guys are I don't have enough familiarity with it. And it's a deep topic and I wanted to give it the time. So are you saying that the INA, whatever the right acronym is there, is kind of a little dormant, or?
I just don't think anyone's gone through the process yet. It's fairly new. Like Z standard is new as of a couple of years ago, right? Like maybe 2 or 3.
You're saying Z standard. What is that? Am I misunderstanding something?
It's an alternative to like gzip. It's just a compression algorithm.
Oh, you're talking about not registering the MIME types. You're talking about another extension, another type of compression?
Yeah, well, so there's a suffix registry that is specified in that RFC. And I imagine they're similar in terms of the process to go through to actually add something to this registry. So I mean, and we ideally this would exist already, and so I figured we'd kill like 1.5 birds with one stone and like push this through, see what it's like, and then we can kind of extrapolate if the media type registration process is similar. But I don't know.
Yeah, this might be useful, super useful for you, Steve, just because you get to see how how truly awful one of those centralized registration, I don't even know what you'd call it, whatever house is.
Clearinghouse of some sort.
Yeah, exactly. A clearinghouse actually functions.
So you're basically, I should look at this to see if we really want to be approving well-known types. Is that what you're kind of getting at?
Well, this is a thing we should probably do regardless, but reviewing this process would definitely provide feedback or insight into having one. It would definitely provide insight for at least what the process should be if we were going to have one, right?
I'm just scrolling through. Let me just I'll just paste this in the window. And I wanted to try to end early. So, I see something. Thanks, Jimmy. So I'm just scrolling through this and I see what you mean. There are a whole bunch of application ones already there, and it looks like a pretty wide range of things. So I'm not saying I won't go do it, but it looks like it clearly is a process that people are using. So hopefully this shouldn't be too hard, but I will I'll certainly go through it myself to experiment. I don't know if I'll actually submit one, but I'll go through as far as I can before I hit the submit button.
I see application Z standard in here. I don't see the suffix thing though.
I just linked the suffix registry.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
Okay. So I'll take the to-do to go do some more research. If anybody has more info, certainly please, that'd be great. And with that was basically what I was trying to cover for today. I was hoping to get further along in the spec, but there was a lot of feedback to parse, and I wanted to make sure I gave it the time it needed.
This is Ram from Cisco. So in one of the earlier meetings, you noted that the artifact spec is contingent upon the dist spec being released. So I'm curious on what stage the dist spec itself is at.
I'll speak to the one part that I was just working. So we're definitely trying to get the distribution spec to be a 1.0. I know Mike and others are really trying to get there. What we were trying to actually remove the catalog API as an example because we wanted to close it down, because there's a couple of things that want to get closed down, and then we're leaving it open that if there's new things we want to get in before, then we'll do it, or they'll do it. I shouldn't speak as if I'm on distribution spec. Actually, Mike, why don't or somebody else, let me back out of this one, let you guys speak to that one.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That was my only point, was that we're not really doing an API here so much as we're discussing how people will do things and providing a place to store information, right?
Yeah, maybe the question, and I'm sorry, I didn't remember your first name, or Chincha. The reason, and if you look at, there's a scoping, although I think we renamed it from scoping to something else. No, there's a scoping section. One of the reasons we can't deal with CNAB yet is we do need a change to image and or distribution. So we're trying to very intentionally make artifacts v1 use what's already there.
Right.
We will add something for an artifacts 1.1 or some 1 plus to do the additional pieces. So artifacts does not need anything that is not already in distribution spec. It's really a matter of how do you relax some of the media type validations that most of us are doing now because there was only one type. Yeah, that's a good point. Sorry, I was reading. So there's a different, I was perceiving your question as, hey, when are you gonna get this distribution spec 1.0? And that, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, no, I was just laughing with you. No.
So the answer is, Mike, just to quote what Mike has said, they're trying to get it done by the end of this calendar year, 19. Actually, wait, that's this calendar year. You've only got a month or two left, dude.
Yep, we can get off our maintainer chairs.
Yeah, I think there's some stuff we want to figure out in terms of like validation and testing and stuff. But in terms of the spec isn't going to change. Like there's no backwards incompatibility. So like we already know what 1.0 is going to look like. It's just some work items that we want to figure out.
If we needed any additional fields or an extra API, we could always just tag that under a separate document with the v1.1 or something, right?
Yeah, there's a GitHub milestone that has kind of the issues that are tagged. Some of them, like looking at the one I have open in here, it's like ensure flexibility for unspecified media types. That's not so much an action item as it is just like a make sure that we don't fuck over the artifact work when we freeze the version. So like not all these things are actually action items, but yeah, you can basically follow the milestone, and I suspect when that milestone is closed out, that's when we'll be ready to cut something.
Yep.
Okie dokie. I pasted what was in the chat window into the HackMD because it's a great idea. I can't even tell. Oh, John suggested we should get the OCI media types registered. I just assumed they were. So I'll be happy to go through that process if others would. I don't know how it gets assigned to a person. So if it's not there must be some attribution to who. So I'll go through it, and before I hit the submit, I will check with I don't know who. I will ping the dev alias to figure out how do we figure out who would own these media types that we submit to INNAA, and we'll test that ourselves, I guess is the point. I'm recognizing I shouldn't be the one to test it as Steve Lasker as an identity. We need to figure out how it's an OCI identity.
Yeah, I would suggest as a pattern, it should be the owners of the artifact types, which are the maintainers of the image spec itself.
Agreed. So if you guys want to volunteer, I'm happy to have you guys tell us how it went.
Maybe let's open an issue, and then we can continue this discussion on the repo.
That's fair.
And then that issue could be tagged, and tracked in this process.
Right.
That sounds good. Okay, I have to, being selfish, I have to prep for another meeting that I have to do at 3. So is there anything else? Any other topics?
Not here. Good progress. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Having the feedback has really helped. I know this is kind of starting to ramp up a little bit more. Having feedback, good, bad, or indifferent, has been really helpful to make sure, because this media type is a perfect example of a space that I knew we needed to do more work on. So I really appreciate all the feedback. and I really appreciate if other people want to make PRs, or however they want to go about contributing. So that'd be really helpful. So thank you.